Good morning, good evening, and welcome. My name is Daniela Coleman. I'm the Director of Admissions and Recruiting at Johns Hopkins. I'm delighted to be welcoming all of you to join us today. We will be giving a brief presentation about the Johns Hopkins programs. I do invite you to join our stand today and tomorrow as we have administrators on hand to answer all of your questions. But we are also delighted to have a guest lecture from one of our esteemed faculty members who I will introduce shortly. And we will be welcoming your questions at the end of the presentation. So briefly, my name is Daniela Coleman. I'm the Director of Admissions at Johns Hopkins. I'm based in Bologna, but we obviously have campuses all around the world, both in the United States, in Asia, and in Europe, as well as our campuses and options of academic programs online. This particular slide gives you an overview of all the academic programs that we offer at Johns Hopkins. But in today's EU Studies Fair, our administrative colleagues will be particularly answering questions about programs offered at our campus in Bologna. We obviously take a transatlantic approach when looking at a variety of different international affairs issues, but one of the unique aspects of Johns Hopkins is our global campus, our emphasis on economics, and of course, our emphasis on foreign languages. For those of you that may not be familiar with our campus in Bologna, we've actually had a presence in Europe since 1955. We currently have around 200 students from 40 different nationalities. We were actually very lucky this year, despite the pandemic. We were actually open for business, if I can use that terminology, obviously with social distancing. But in our normal academic year, we usually have around 200 students from 40 different nationalities. Our students look at international affairs, international relations issues, both from a European and US perspective when looking at these issues. And one of the beauties of our programs is that as a graduate program, the majority of our classes are quite small. On average, students usually have between 15 to 20 students in the classroom, although some of our classes, such as our economics classes, are slightly larger. But this gives students the opportunities to get to know their professors and to get to know their students. We have resident faculty and visiting professors from world-class universities, think tanks, and the private sector. On average, every year, our students have over 70 courses to choose from, as well as a variety of master's programs to do. And last but not least, we also have two research institutes at SAIS Europe, the Bologna Institute for Policy Research and the Center for Constitutional Studies and Democratic Development. These are two research centers which students can obviously do internships with, but they produce a number of original work, and they obviously give students the opportunity to attend seminars with experts and policymakers, in addition to the academic coursework that a student would undertake as a student at SAIS. One of the unique factors about being part of a university is the network at Johns Hopkins. As a student at SAIS, you are part of the SAIS network of over 20,000 alumni worldwide. Our students are everywhere, and they partake in a variety of different sectors. But as a student at SAIS, you're also part of the Johns Hopkins alumni network of over 180,000 students around the world. Our alumni are very dedicated. They help our students in their career search, and they are wonderful resources for you, whether you are a current student or after graduation. Just briefly about our admissions process, but I do welcome you to attend our actual booth. Our admissions process is pretty standard. Currently, we are still recruiting for the Masters in European Public Policy, which is a rolling admissions deadline. Our deadline for that program is April 15th. And we also are still recruiting for our Masters of Arts in Global Risk. That deadline is April 1st. Most of our deadlines are November 1st and January 7th for the following fall. As you think about applying to SAIS, remember that all of our materials can be submitted online. It includes an application, a resume. We ask you to submit statements of purpose, an essay, also an analytical essay on any issue of international economic significance, as well as recommendation letters, official transcripts. And for those of you whose English is not a native language and you have not done your university studies in a country where English is the official language, you will be required to submit a TOEFL, an IELTS, or a Cambridge proficiency exam. Once you submit all these documents, we invite you for an interview, and we obviously talk a lot about the program. Over the next 2 days, there are going to be representatives at our stands, so do feel free to log in. We also will have alumni on our second day. And I list here our personal email, so if you have specific questions, do feel free to send us a note. But without further ado, I am delighted to present today Professor Michael Lee. Professor Lee is the academic director of the Masters of Arts in European Public Policy. He's also was very involved, obviously, in European affairs. Previously, he was the Director General for Enlargement of the European Commission. We are delighted to have him today. He will give a brief lecture on the geopolitical Europe in a world of great power politics, after which we welcome your questions. Without further ado, Professor Lee.
Thank you very much, Daniela. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, this morning, this evening, and to discuss with you an issue of great public concern today. In December 2019, a new European Commission took office, proclaiming itself to be a geopolitical commission and expecting to be judged by its success in this role. But is geopolitics really the right concept to express the EU's growing external role? Geopolitics traditionally refers to the impact of geography on the power of states. The main geographic variables which carried weight in the 19th and early 20th century were, first of all, geographic location, size, population, and resources. After the Industrial Revolution, technology was added to the attributes of state power, especially its military dimensions. The digital revolution has given even more importance to technology in state power. Why would the Commission, and more generally the European Union, wish to be judged in the 2020s by its performance as a geopolitical actor, given that geopolitics is really a concept mainly associated with the interaction of powers in the 19th and early 20th century? Today, perhaps geopolitics has taken on another connotation and is used more generally to imply a strategic approach. The international system today is dominated by two major rival powers, China and the United States. A third power, Russia, which clings to its great power status by making adroit use of diplomacy and military power. Now, Europe is potentially the fourth component in this configuration of major powers. And one can ask whether Europe as such is embodied in this role by the EU and its institutions, or more by the enabled states of Europe itself. The main challenge facing the EU today in terms of geopolitics is to situate itself beneficially between China and the US. This dilemma was particularly visible recently in the debate over the comprehensive agreement on investment with China, which was signed in December at the end of the German presidency of the Council, and whose ratification by the European Parliament this year depends on reforms in China, especially on labor law and minority rights. But governments have conceded to the EU only a limited role in foreign policy in the classic sense. 2009 was an important milestone in this regard with the Lisbon Treaty, because the Lisbon Treaty set up a new post, the post of High Representative for Security, for Foreign Policy, Foreign and Security Policy, combined, double-hatted, as they say in the jargon, with the role of Commission Vice President for External Affairs. This was meant to bring together the various skills of the Commission in a range of fields, from trade to development assistance, taxation, customs, you name it, in order to help meet the foreign policy goals that the High Representative would work out together with the foreign ministers of the member states. At the same time, there was set up the European External Action Service, for the first time, a diplomatic service for the European Union. Now, you could say it's still early days after the first decade, but so far, I think the court is still out as to the overall impact and success of this new arrangement. It must be conceded that the EU's role in the classic issues of geopolitics linked to war and peace, for example, in Libya or Syria, is rather limited. NATO remains the main setting for European countries to work together on territorial defense, despite the fact that the EU has a number of embryonic initiatives in the defense industry to avoid duplication and to bring together the defense industries of the different member states on major weapons programs. France calls for the European Union to develop its strategic autonomy, which has become something of a buzzword since the Trump administration, a term that was first used in France in the 1970s. It was particularly dear to former French President Charles de Gaulle, to imply independence. In the first instance, French independence, and now in the EU concept, the independence of the European Union. This was particularly marked given the fact that the Trump administration made known its disdain for allies in Europe. But until now, there's no consensus around the notion of strategic autonomy, and it's been given a mixed reception, not least in Germany. Even though the EU may not be a major player in classic foreign policy as such, it does have a significant track record in other areas, particularly, for example, in conflict management and resolution, especially noteworthy achievements, the Iran nuclear deal, which the Biden administration now is seeking to rejoin, and overcoming past rivalries in the Balkans. Lately, however, the EU's role in the Balkans, which is really our doorstep, has somewhat come into question, as the countries in the region have been offered the prospect of eventual membership in the EU, but this goal seems to be very far away, opening the door to influence by rival powers, China, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and others. The EU's trademark soft power is suffering to some extent from internal threats to democracy in some of our own member states, recurrent crises from Euro crisis through to migration and now the pandemic, and the difficulties we're having in coordinating our vaccine strategy. Aspirants to EU membership in the Balkans, who've been given the perspective of eventual membership in the EU, are now largely relying on Russia and China to supply them with vaccine. Brexit has dealt a further blow to the EU's geopolitical claims, given Britain's status as a permanent Security Council member, a nuclear power, and the fact that with France, it was one of two member states with the capacity to project power beyond the EU's immediate periphery. President Biden has welcomed the EU's ambitious transatlantic agenda and the willingness of Washington to meet the EU in supporting multilateralism is encouraging for the prospects of cooperation in the future. But still, other issues will remain difficult, including long-standing trade disputes And President Biden won't, as one observer put it, be ready to eat from the EU's menu, and will be mainly concerned with foreign policy issues that have a domestic impact, and of course, rivalry with China. I want to leave you with the thought today that perhaps the EU's strengths do not really lie so much in the field of geopolitics, but rather in the field of geoeconomics. The EU is par excellence a geoeconomic power, if indeed we use this 19th century language of power at all. The EU's most effective tools are trade policy and technical regulation. The best presentation of the EU's geopolitical role, in my view, is in a book that's having considerable impact. Anu Bradford's book, The Brussels Effect, here it is, How the European Union Rules the World. I think that the subtitle is a little optimistic, if you want to see it that way, but nonetheless, it's clear that the influence of the EU beyond its own borders comes much more by leveraging issues like trade and investment, as well as standard setting and the EU's support for a rules-based international system than it is through the EU's impact on questions of war and peace. The EU's real strengths lie in regulating market competition, consumer health and safety, the environment, climate change, and such issues. The EU, under the present Commission, clearly is playing a major role in efforts to regulate, for example, the activities of social media companies and big tech. And I think it's in areas like this, rather than war and peace questions, they used to be called high policy issues, where the EU's impact is greater. So let's see whether the next Commission that takes office in 2024, instead of calling itself a geopolitical commission, will call itself a geoeconomic commission. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Your discussion has generated a lot of great questions. As we have a little under 10 minutes, I want to take advantage of having you with us. So I will read out some questions. If these questions you feel comfortable answering, we'll go straight to them, and we'll also address some of the admissions questions that we got. So the first question is the participant writes, has the departure of the UK from the European Union weakened the EU's capacity to project power abroad? Or on the contrary, will it haste and facilitate efforts by countries such as France to establish independent and unified European defense, diplomatic strategies, and policies?
A very interesting question. We'll know the answer in a few years' time. On the one side, you can't get away from the fact that the departure of the UK has diminished the overall weight of the European Union in the world. A country with 67 million people, perhaps the sixth largest economy in the world, permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, nuclear power, the proud possessor now of two large modern aircraft carriers. It's a country that has certain power projection possibilities. And with the departure of the UK, France is left really as the main member state with this type of capacity. Also, the UK rather supported the notion of an EU foreign policy role, going back to the original reasons why the UK joined the EU. In the words of the famous American Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, Britain had lost an empire and had not yet found a role. And there's little doubt that it sought in the EU a new means to have influence in the world. That said, it was also an obstacle to some extent, particularly to defense cooperation, because it gave primacy to NATO in this role. So there are some in France and elsewhere that believe that the departure of the UK is an opportunity to develop certain foreign policy and defense initiatives to which Britain would have been opposed.
Fantastic. We have a very interesting question regarding the impact of COVID. The participant writes, Bloomberg has predicted that the EU bloc could lose between $50 to $100 million in the next quarter if COVID lockdowns continue, and at worst, recession is possible. What effect will the slow vaccine rollout in the EU have on citizens' trust in the Commission to represent and fight for them?
We're at the very start, really, of the rollout of the EU's vaccination program. And it must be admitted that there is disappointment that it has not gone more quickly. And we saw a row last weekend, particularly over the EU's plan to control exports of vaccines to ensure that sufficient supplies are available to citizens. So listening to this discussion, citizens could perhaps be doubtful and lose trust. On the other hand, opinion polls suggest that overall they tend to have more trust in the EU than they do in their own governments. And I believe that what we've seen so far is a temporary delay, which should be overcome, if not by the end of the first quarter, by the end of March, then certainly in the second quarter of the year. So I think these early setbacks will be forgotten once a very significant proportion of the population is vaccinated, which I believe will be the case by mid-2021.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one or two more questions. This question has to do with technology. What role will the EU play, particularly EU regulation and policy of big tech in the US-Sino-Tech rivalry trade war?
I think it's very important for the EU to coordinate its efforts to regulate big tech with the United States. And the Biden administration is certainly open to trying to develop a common approach with the EU vis-à-vis China, even though our interests are quite often divergent. The EU hopes that there'll be a revival of efforts in the OECD framework to come to an agreement between all member states and the United States over the taxation of big tech companies, for example. And the Commission has put a very ambitious Digital Services Act on the table of the member states and of the European Parliament. And as this goes forward, the EU will be playing a more active role on these many issues related to digital security, to data privacy, and will make efforts to coordinate with the United States on these issues. But one must admit that most big tech companies today have their origins in the United States. And if the EU comes to challenge and even perhaps to take legal action against some of these companies, then the willingness of Washington to coordinate with the EU will be tested.
Thank you, Professor Lee. I still think we have time for one or two more questions. The next question asks, what do you think Turkey's future role will be with regards to the EU? How will Turkey be perceived?
This has been a subject of fluctuating sentiments over the years. And we've gone through a difficult period in 2020, particularly with tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the fact that several member states have even lent support through naval forces to Greece and Cyprus, whose exclusive economic zones have been challenged not only by Turkish exploration vessels, but also by military vessels. At the same time, in the European Union, there is great concern about the rule of law and democracy within Turkey, which creates certain difficulties in further developing our relationship. However, there is a very important positive agenda for the EU and Turkey to work on together. Trade, migration, security, counterterrorism. This is part of the menu, the agenda for cooperation between the EU and Turkey. And at the beginning of this year, President Erdogan said that he wished to turn a page and to engage anew with the European Union, and exploratory talks have been going on in recent days to see how that can develop. So we start this new year with some measure of hope that we can get beyond recent difficulties and re-engage with Turkey on issues of mutual interest.
Fantastic. And we have time for one more question. Outside of Russia and China, what challenges do the rise of other countries, such as India, Brazil, and South Africa, pose for the European Union?
The European Union participates in the G20 and in different fora where Brazil, Mexico, India, and other powers participate. And I think the EU's main role is to support multilateralism, to support a rules-based international system, and to work together with these medium powers, if you will, to ensure that the international system doesn't just become a struggle for power on the sort of 19th or early 20th century model, but rather a framework for cooperation.
Fantastic. So we've come to the end of our Q&A. This has been an extraordinarily engaging debate. I want to first thank Professor Lee as the Academic Director of the Masters of Arts in European Public Policy for having joined us. And I also want to thank the participants who have submitted such engaging questions. I realize I didn't address the application questions, but we will have a chat session following this, so I'm happy to go into details about the admissions process. Again, I just want to put in a plug. On February 18th, we will have a info session with Professor Lee, who will speak about the Masters in European Public Policy. So I do invite all of the participants online to join that session. But over the next 2 days, we will have representatives at our stands, both our admissions representatives as well as our alumni. But today was a sample lecture of the type of engaging conversation that we offer at SAIS. We welcome your questions. We look forward to hearing from you. And whatever you decide, we wish you the best of luck in your journey as you apply to graduate school. Thank you very much, Professor Lee, and also thank you to the organizers for the EU Studies Fair for their support.